Hey there, welcome to Professor Purl, a YouTube channel about knitting and other crafts. I'm Nicole and this is episode 16. You can find me on Instagram as profpurl, Ravelry as profpurl. There's an email, a Ravelry group. All that information is linked below or listed below, and all the links to things I talk about are in the description bar. There should be a little arrow you can click and see. And so if you're new here, thanks for checking it out, the channel out, and if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for being the community here. And yeah, I just really appreciate you taking time to watch this and chatting knitting with me. So I'm recording on my porch again, and it's just, I live in Oregon, the Pacific Northwest of the United States, and it's a really interesting weather day today. It's rained a little bit, it's been sunny a little bit, and I don't know, I still think it's just such a beautiful day. I just want to be outside, even though it's kind of cold today. It's 48 degrees Fahrenheit, but I was actually really excited it was cold so I could wear my new sweater. So I guess I'll just hop into the finished object. There's only one finished object today. I have one finished object for this episode, and it's my Chunky Soufflé. I love it, and I love it that it's cold today. I'm a professor. That's how the name Professor Purl, kind of for the name of the channel, how it sort of came to be. I'm a math education professor, and I'm actually on sabbatical this year, so I've been really enjoying some extra time with family and a flexibility in schedule. And what does it have to do with the souffle, you ask? I finished knitting my Chunky Soufflé, and it's cold today. And today is my seniors' celebration party. And I was ecstatic because I was like, I can wear this Chunky Soufflé with a skirt to this party this afternoon. And I've seen a lot of people in the Instagram like styling their soufflés, both original soufflé and this Chunky Soufflé with skirts. And so, okay, this is not a good angle to show the skirt, but I have a skirt on. I'm very excited to wear it to my senior celebration. I'm realizing that I haven't podcasted in a while, and I'm totally out of my natural flow because I have not mentioned the designer, the yarn, any of the things. I'm just talking about how excited I am to wear it. Okay, so this is the Chunky Soufflé designed by Laura of Penrose Knits, and she just released the souffle, which I tested. Maybe I'll pop in a picture here of my souffle. And I applied to test the Chunky Soufflé because I've basically made the decision that I'm going to knit all of her soufflés. Whether I test them or not, I'm going to purchase the patterns and knit them. I'm going to knit every soufflé she designs. I'm going to do that. So of course I had to apply for the Chunky Soufflé, which is, it gets its name because it is a nod to the soufflé with the ruffle, but it is made out of chunky yarn. She designed it in Drops Wish, which is a beautiful chunky yarn that is like a blown yarn and all natural fibers. I think cotton, merino, and alpaca. I have since learned I can readily buy Wish online, but which maybe was obvious, but I was nervous about wait time, and I just wanted to cast it on and international shipping, which turns out there's good options. Nonetheless, so I decided I wanted to find a different yarn than the Drops Wish, and I went to Knit Picks, and I found their Wonder Fluff yarn, which is also a blown-in yarn, but it turns out it's much thinner yarn than drop swish. So I held it double. I held the Knit Picks Wonder Fluff double to get the same gauge that I would have needed with drop swish. Although I held it double, it's still a very budget friendly sweater. And I have to say, I loved the yarn. Like, it's super soft. Even though I held it double, I'll just, like, you can't tell. Like, it looks as though it was just one piece of yarn. Sometimes when you hold yarn double, you can sort of see the two strands, and I don't really feel like you can. And it's lovely. I conjecture that one of the reasons why Laura designed the Chunky Soufflé with drop swish is because although it's a super bulky yarn, it's quite light because it's a blown in yarn. And this is also a blown in yarn from Knit Picks. And also very light despite holding it double. The tube is nylon, which is the difference between the drop swish, which is a cotton tube. So it's a nylon tube, and then merino alpaca is blown into it. So I gauge swatched, and I would say it's very important to gauge swatch both the dry yarn and then the gauge swatch, take that and soak it. You should always do that if that's how you're going to take care of your sweaters. If you're gonna soak it, like, you should soak your gauge swatch as well. If you care about the growth, I should say. And it grew quite a bit, so I'm really glad I did those measurements, because when I initially tried this on, it was quite snug to my body, and now it just fits exactly how I wanted it. I forget what size I knit. I should know this because I tested. Oh, here. I knit the size 4. So I knit the size 5 in the original souffle, and I had quite a bit more positive ease, and I love it. I think I would like, though, to knit another souffle in a size 4, just for a different style and a different look. So since this is a super bulky sweater, I knew that maybe I wouldn't want as much positive ease as I have in my original souffle, so I applied to test the size 4, and it just fits. It fits perfect. I love it so much. So yeah, I just love these sleeves. I think they're the perfect amount of poof. I just love the look of a poofy sleeve. Or are these called bishop sleeves? I love a good bishop sleeve. But as a mom, I don't want anything like overly, like too much. So for me, the way it turned out on my body, like, it's just really perfect. I think for the drop swish, maybe, I noticed the people that knit it out of drop swish, maybe their sleeves are like a little bit more poofy, and I don't know if I tightened up my gauge or something on the sleeves or something, but I'm just here to say I love it. Love it, love it, love it. And, you know, I live in the Pacific Northwest, so my favorite kinds of sweaters to knit are actually fingering short sleeve sweaters. I sometimes will knit a DK. And so I was a little bit nervous about knitting something out of really bulky yarn, but it breathes really well, and it's like, I think one of these really, even though it might seem counterintuitive to want to have a bulky sweater in the spring, I think it's so amazing, because right now I'm styling, for instance, this sweater with a cute skirt that you can't see. And I'm on my porch, and it's not very warm. It's 48 degrees Fahrenheit, but I'm very comfortable. So I don't have to wear a jacket. Like, I can just go out with a sweater and a skirt, and I think that's really cool. So anyway, I would totally knit another one of these. I feel like I say that about so many sweaters, so take that. But I do plan to knit more of these. I knit mine in a hot pink one. Basically, this color is called Cosmopolitan. When I was in the first testing group for the original souffle, a few people did very bright ones. There was like a bright yellow one, and a couple people did bright hot pink ones. And the whole time, I mean, I loved mine, but the whole time I was like, I need a bright one. I need a bright one. So I did this one in a bright pink. And of course, it's like you're just inspired by the other testers. And so in this Chunky Soufflé group, some people have knit lighter color ones, like almost like cream. And now I feel like I need one of those. Anyway, I'm gonna wear this so much. And it's gonna take its inaugural run today to a party for my seniors that are graduating. Okay, I went on and on with this. I do have a little bit more to say about souffles. There's gonna be a couple more things about souffles. Sorry, not sorry. So the last episode, I asked if anyone would be interested in a souffle knit along or a ruffle knit along. And I got a lot of responses that people are very interested in a souffle knit along. And I know that I want to knit more. Like, I want to knit another mohair souffle. I would knit another one of these. Like, I'm definitely interested in knitting more souffles. And so let's do it. And I think that means I'm gonna have about 3 knit alongs going on, and I'm thinking that's kind of wild, but it's also like, why not? Let's just have fun knitting together. So, okay, the details on it. The hashtag will be more souffle, please. I think one person on the internet has used that hashtag so far, and it was like literally in context wanting more souffle, and it was a couple years ago. So I think we'll take over that hashtag, more souffle, please. And so that was how I'll do it on Instagram, and then we'll have a Ravelry thread in the Professor Purl podcast group. So the cast on date, I was playing around with the date of like June 1st, thinking that would be really fun. Give us like a month to prepare. But then I thought, it's summer sock camp coming up. I know, I love summer sock camp. You love summer sock camp. Everybody does summer sock camp. And I don't know for sure, but I'm thinking probably the cast on date's June 1st. That's what it was last year, I think. So I didn't want to compete with that, because that's like, we should all enjoy and embrace that amazing community. So thinking about that, I was thinking, well, I don't want to do it before, which I'll mention why in a little bit. So I was thinking maybe June 15th might be a good day to cast on another souffle. And so I'm thinking about June 15th. That gives us like a month and a half to prepare. So clearly this is like loose details, so I will put more specific details on Instagram and on Ravelry, so look out there. But more souffle, please. We'll work out the other details. It's, if I want to be inclusive, probably like whips would be allowed too, kind of situation. So just, we'll start planning together. I don't know. I won't go into more souffle. We'll leave that for dream knitting. Oh, my coffee's getting cold. Okay, got my little notebook here to remind me. All right, I have 3 whips. Okay, I have more than 3 whips, but since the last time I recorded, I have 3 works in progress that I've been working on. Okay, the first one is my rad band cardigan, which, I mean, if you stick around to hear more about the rad band, I'm so amazed. I feel like I've talked about it so much that it is almost probably annoying at this point, but I've made a lot of progress on it, like a lot, and I'm really excited to show you. So I'm having a Scrappy sweater make-along called the Scrappy Sweater Along. When did it start? It started a couple months ago, and it goes until September 1st. Very casual. Use your scraps to make a sweater, make-along. Whips allowed. No pressure to finish, not even a finished object thread, just a chatter thread. but there's Zoom nights, and so that's been really great for keeping me accountable. But since the last time I recorded and the last Zoom, I've done quite a bit. So here's my progress keeper, which is a purple peep. And I finished this color. This is Folklore. This is my Advent yarn from Stress Knits. So this is the colorway Folklore, which is like a pink and a green. I finished the next color, which was tie-dye. And I do believe that this looks like I imagine like a very cute minty gray tie-dye t-shirt. I did this next color, which is called Willow, which is just a really nice tonal green. And then put a section on a holder, which is like a pearl string that I'm using. And then I started this pink color. This pink color is actually not part of the Advent. So basically the way the Radvent cardigan works, you knit 2 halves of your cardigan and then graft them together. And it requires 25 colors. So Stress Knits Advent has 24 colors, mini skeins, and a 25th full skein, which Maddie from the We Share Needles podcast, she had a Stress Knits Advent as well. She knit a Radvent in like a month. It was really incredible. And she used the part of the 25th skein here, and that makes sense. My hesitation for using the full hank was twofold. The first was my last Advent from like 2 years ago. The full skein was probably the most underweight skein of yarn I've ever received. Like, it was like in the 80s for grams. And so usually a full skein yarn is like 100 grams. Of course, there's like a margin of error because like machines mill the yarn and like, you know, nothing's perfectly going to be exactly 100 grams when you get it, but it was in the 80s. And so when I knit a pair of socks, it didn't leave me a lot left over. If I use contrasting colors, you know, only 50 grams, but it's nice to have the full hank if you want it. And so I was just nervous that maybe, I don't know, I was just nervous about that. So I didn't want to break into it. And then also, because I don't know what I want to use that skinny yarn for. And then my second hesitation was the colors had a lot of blue, and there is some blue in this Advent, but what I love about the Stress Knits palette of colors is the mints and the pinks and the yellows. And so I love a yellow and a pink together. So I knew I wanted, if I was going to put in an extra color, I'd like it to be pink. And so I had some extra yarn from Stress Knits, and I had a mini skein that was this pink mini. It was a colorway called My Jam, which is literally my jam, like this pink. I love it. And I knew that the next color, the last color you use in the Radvent is in the light, and so that color pairing together I just think is epic, and I love it. I love pink and yellow together. So anyway, I am completely done with the left side of my Radvent. So essentially, this is kind of messy looking, but basically I have my 2 halves done. So now I just need to graft them together and pick up the button band. This is going to be a very long process still. And it's going to be made even longer because I pulled out my other half of my big basket. This is my Radvent basket. And somehow my pearl string that I had my live stitches on came out and has been out for a while. And so the yarn has started to unravel. And so I have some like repair work to do before I can graft it. But I'm really looking forward to grafting this together and like seeing the sweater come to life. This has been a labor of love, like to knit the sweater. It's taken me so long. It's probably like the longest I've knit a sweater. But I also haven't been working on it like exclusively. I've been working on other things. I think I've test knit 3 sweaters in the time that I've been working on this, so it's okay. And I like this idea. That was sort of the inspiration behind the Scrappy sweater along, is I love this idea of having a Scrappy sweater that I just enjoy working on, and I don't feel any pressure to produce it and finish it. I mean, I'm going to finish it, but just there's no expectations to finish it and in a timeline. And I think that's probably how people treat their scrappy blankets, but I am not a blanket maker. So I think as soon as I'm done with this scrappy sweater, the rad vent, I'm going to cast on another one. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I gave this yarn, this giant yarn, this is 226 grams and it's lightweight because it's not superwash, it's a natural wool. Got this from Blue Moon Fiber. So Blue Moon. And the colorway is Mica. It's 1,120 yards. And I actually have two of these, but one of them is not wound up into a cake. 100% certified organic, 21.5 micron merino. It's so soft. So I gauge swatched this in the round. It's still attached because I had a different sweater in mind. And I'll talk about that later, but I ended up deciding not to knit a sweater out of this, a certain sweater out of this, but I love this yarn. So as soon as my rad vent's done, there's so much leftovers from this rad vent. And I have a lot of leftovers from the prior year's advent. And I don't know, I treat these mini skeins sort of like gold and treasure, like I want to use up every last scrap. So, and I know Maddie from the Weisher Needles actually feels similarly because she's using the leftovers from her rad vent to make a cowl, and it looks really cool. She might be done with it or nearly done. And so these are treasures, like every little last nugget of our mini skeins are precious, and all of our yarn really. Well, anyways, so I can use this as my main color and hold these with it and do a sea glass. And yeah, so it's a similar color palette. And I already have one, I will have one sweater, but I think it'll just be a totally different look because the sea glass tee is just short sleeve tee. This is more of a brown than a gray. I don't know. I just think it'll look different enough that it won't matter that it's a similar palette. And I'll wear it in different contexts, and I'm excited about it. So that's the rad vent update. The next Zoom will be this coming Tuesday, which is, depending on when you're watching this, who knows when you're watching this, but if you're watching this soon to when this publishes on YouTube, Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022 at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. There will be a Zoom for Scrappy Sweater Makealong, and it's not too late to join. So yeah, I think the two kind of sweater make-alongs going on. So there's this Scrappy Sweater Makealong, and then mid-June there will be a souffle, are kind of like hints about like what I will probably be wearing if I go to Rhinebeck. So I'm hoping to go to Rhinebeck, and which is a yarn festival in New York in the fall, and so I will wear likely a souffle at Rhinebeck and also a scrappy sweater. So that's my sweater plans for Rhinebeck. And so there's some make-alongs going on. You'll have to let me know if you're going or participating in either of these make-alongs, and we can meet up and take a picture together or something. I know this is like really advanced planning, but you know. The next whip is a pair of socks that I'm just knitting kind of slowly because this had most of my attention, and then the rad vent. And so, oh, actually, just kidding. Here's my socks. I think I showed these in the last podcast. I'd started them, which I am knitting a toe-up pair of socks on magic loop. So my favorite way of knitting socks is cuff down 9-inch needles, but I do appreciate like all the methods, and so I just thought it would be fun to, I don't know, I was craving magic loop and toe up. I don't know how to describe it, so I started knitting this DK kind of cable thing. It's, for me, I haven't it memorized, like I don't need a pattern. Well, it's self-drafted, so I'm doing it every 4 rows, and for me it's easy enough to do. This yarn is actually a book themed yarn. I think I forgot to mention the yarn last podcast. I bought it at the Rose City Yarn Crawl at a yarn store that is also a bookstore, Weird Sisters, and they had a pop-up. Is that what's it called? A trunk show? Pop-up? I don't know. A yarn dyer there, and all of her yarn is book themed. And so this colorway I think is called Foxing, and it is a nod to like the old like paper in an older book. And just a little math and professor life. I love that because one of my very first research studies was actually an old math text, like from like the 1700s, 1800s, and I have a bunch in my office. And so I just was really drawn to that colorway. Okay, and so I was knitting these cable socks, and then I decided I was going to duplicate stitch the words read on one sock and more on the other socks, and for a multitude of reasons. One of the reasons has been just like the idea of like taking self-care to read for yourself, like that like you are worthy to knit for yourself. So it's like self-talk to myself, like I'm worthy enough to slow down, to take time for myself to read for myself. So that was part of it, is this idea of like self-care and making time for that. And then the other reason was just sort of like I think this idea of like right now in the United States, there's a lot going on with like banned books and banning books, and this has been happening for months. It's recently just even made the news even more because of what's happening in Florida. And so I had started this before what happened in Florida, but it was this idea of like, instead of reading less, to read more, like sort of a counter statement to the banning of books. And so anyway, I duplicate stitched the word read, and I'll put more on the second sock. And so I'm imagining when I'm reading and my feet are up on the ottoman, you know, it'll say read more, and then I will hopefully be reading more. So that's that whip. Basically, I think I did a couple repeats and duplicate stitched. I was bringing that to Matilda's swim lessons. It was like the perfect swim lesson knitting, because her swim lessons are like a half hour, or the current session she's in, they're like a half hour, so I can get a full cable repeat done. But I dropped my cable needle and it almost went like in this big crack under that like goes like, there's these big cracks for like draining the water, and it almost like went into that crack. And then I was like, I don't want to lose a needle, so I switched my pool knitting to a Musselburgh or Musselburgh hat, and I am knitting this out of Arkansas Yarn Company yarn that I got in the Sock Society box. This is a beautiful label. It's a vellum label that comes on it, and it's in the colorway Puddle Jumper, which I made a reel about on Instagram because it just was one of those colorways that like pulled at my heartstrings. Like, I have a 4-year-old and imagining her jumping in puddles this spring, and I just, yeah. And so the colorway, well, this, I had it, you could pick the base, and I picked the Yummy High Twist, which is 85% superwash merino, 15% nylon. And I love an 80-20. This is my first time knitting with an 85-15. Oh my gosh, I love this base. It's so good. And how this is knitting up is just lovely. It's very subtle speckles. There's mostly green and kind of pink speckles, occasionally a yellow and occasionally a blue. And I don't know how to describe the base color. I've watched a couple podcasts, and like people like Lindsay from Always Yarn First have called it like a gray, but I don't know, my eyes kind of see like a greeny gray, but instead of a bluey or creamy. But I don't know, it's just one of those colors that's very interesting and I just love it. I wanted my first Musselburgh hat to be neon colored, but I just couldn't get this colorway out of my head, and I just thought, knit it all. And I cast it on this giant one, just so I could get the increases. Well, all right, so the Musselburgh hat. I first cast one on in October with the very original pattern, and I did it on a plane, and I was getting 9 stitches per inch, and for the gauge, and the way the Musselburgh pattern is written, you measure your gauge per inch, and that's how you decide your increase amount and the sizes. It's a quite lovely pattern because you can use any weight of yarn essentially, and there's so many different sizes, and it's a really cool chart. And the original one did not have a 9-inch, like a 9 stitch per inch gauge. And so then I felt kind of deflated about it, and I did some math to persevere, but then it just felt like it was a very stiff fabric. So I scrapped that, pulled it out. That yarn ended up becoming my Selena socks, which was my first design ever. And so it all worked out. So I went up a needle size for these, but I still got the same gauge, 9 stitches per inch, but the Musselburgh pattern has been updated. And so now 9 inches, I keep saying 9 inches, 9 stitches per inch is in the chart. So, and the fabric of this I like quite a lot better than the first one I cast on. The first time I cast one on, I used a pinhole cast on because I had heard on a podcast that somebody had used that. And I found it very fiddly and I didn't enjoy it. But I was like, perhaps that's because it's my first time doing it. But then I was again in a situation where I was traveling, which I'll talk about in the personal section, but I was literally on a plane again, casting on a Musselburgh again. And I just didn't want to do the fiddly pinhole cast on. Perhaps it's not fiddly for you. It just was fiddly for me. So I tried the disappearing loop cast on instead. And for me, that was like a major winner. So I think for my next Musselburgh, I will also use the disappearing loop cast on. I would love to know like what cast on you use if you knit a Musselburgh. Like, which one do you prefer? The pinhole, the disappearing loop? I would love to know. It's just knitting nerd life. So, what the inspiration, like why now? Like why the Musselburgh now? Basically, I was talking with Kristen and Maddie from the We Share Needles podcast, and they have been really just like reading so much. It's just inspirational how much they've been reading and talking about books on their podcast. It's almost like their podcast is like a knitting and books podcast now. And I just love hearing what they're reading and chatting. And so from February to, I don't know, this year, it's just going by so quickly. I think either January, February, or February, March. I think February, March. I had a Books and Berets Makealong, and it was so fun. And it was like any books and any berets. And so the way they were talking about books and knitting, we ended up chatting, and I told them about how when I did the Books and Berets Makealong, I had a few people reach out to me and they're like, I'm not a beret person, what about books and beanies? And I was like, this is Books and Berets. But we've decided to collaborate, and I'm just so excited about it because I feel like they're my virtual friends, and now we get to co-host and make along together. So we're going to be doing a make along called Books and Beanies. Well, that's my neighbor's car. Books and Beanies make along. The hashtag will be Books and Beanies Mal, and it's a similar premise of Books and Berets, where any book and any beanie. So they are, I feel like, the queens of the Musselburgh. I mean, they probably can't even count how many Musselburgh hats they've knit. And they knit them quite quickly. And I just feel like it's very apropos that it's beanies with them instead of berets. So anyway, so books and beanies Makealong, and the cast on for it will be May 15th. So like, I should have waited to cast this on the Musselburgh hat. I should have waited to cast it on May 15th, and that was my plan. It truly was, but I was so excited. And so I'm like, well, with the books and berets Makealong, I made 3 berets, so my hope is that I will make multiple beanies. I have lots of ideas about it. So yeah, I'm a much slower knitter, so I very much doubt by May 15th I will have this Musselburgh done, but who knows. And I'll cast on, any excuse to cast on something else, so I will cast on another hat. I did write some notes down here so I could remember what I wanted to talk about that. Okay, so hopefully there's a cast on party on May 15th. I'm thinking we might do it on Instagram Live. I don't know. Watch both of our Instagrams for some details, and of course there will be some Ravelry threads, I'm sure. Although the Makealong is, knitting or crochet, whatever, and it's any book and any beanie, so your finished object or whip photos, it would be ideal if they were like a book and a beanie together. While that's the case, Krista and Maddie, like on their podcast, what kind of like initiated us chatting is they were like, a book club, anybody? And in order to have like a book club or like a book discussion, you should read the same book. And so we picked a book. We were chatting about it, and Kristen on her book list had a book called Before the Coffee Gets Cold. And I had never heard of it because when I searched it on Goodreads and in the Google search engine, I learned that this is actually a very popular book. For a little bit it was sold out on Amazon, but I think it's back on Amazon now. Last night it said it was sold out at Target. But I was okay that it was sold out on Amazon when I looked, because I thought, I'll go to my library and get it. But my library had an 18-week hold. I think Kristen and Maddie's library, it's at their library, and I don't think they have an 18-week hold. They were, from what I understand from chatting with them. So I just think my library might, I feel like all the books I want to read have like long wait times. So I wanted to buy it because 18 weeks, let's Makealong will come and go. I think, if we start May 15th and do it for 2 months, it would end July 15th, and I still wouldn't have the book. So I have a local bookstore, and just side note, if you're in Portland, you should definitely visit it. There's multiple locations, but there's a really cool one in the Purl district. And I actually showed on my Rose City Yarn Crawl vlog if you watch that. And it's Powell's. And so I think yesterday night, Powell's had 9 copies. I purchased one, so now they should have 8 unless somebody's bought one today. So yeah, so I'll link that below if you're interested in purchasing from my local bookstore. I fear dream knitting, it'll be a little rambly today. But I took notes to help me keep focused. I think that, as knitters, the dream knitting is real. So my first dream knitting is I am going to be test knitting the Lennox pullover for Anna of the Bluebird box, and I will put a picture of it here. It's a beautiful boxy sweater, and the test has already started. I have not started mine yet. Why not? Well, it takes sport weight yarn, and that's such an interesting base. For me, I do not have any sport weight in my stash. Sport weight is a different weight than fingering, for sure. It exists. But sometimes a plump fingering can be close to the gauge of sport. So insert this. I tried to gauge swatch this to see if I could get gauge for the Lennox pullover, and I actually did. I did get perfect gauge, stitch gauge, not row gauge, but that's pretty typical for me. And so I could knit the Lennox pullover in this yarn. Of course, it would be thinner and a little bit more, have more drape to it, perhaps. But I just was imagining this boxy pullover. It's going to be a lot of knitting, since it has a lot of ease. And it's a longer test knit, like it goes until August. And so I was imagining knitting it through the summer in this kind of like brown color. And I just wasn't really feeling it, and it wasn't the sport weight, and so I got it in my head that I wanted a pastel neon version of this. Very specific, I know. So I ended up reaching out to my friend Kelly, who's the owner of Les Moutons Rouge Knittery, and she also dyes yarn. And so she is dyeing me up a special batch of yarn for the Lenox pullover. And so I will post a picture of these mini skeins she does, and these are in fingering, and they're like these like pastel neon rainbow. And when I was telling her about my visions of like what I wanted, she was like this, and she sent me this picture that I will insert here, and I was like that. And of course the pink is tempting, but I don't have a neon yellow sweater in my wardrobe, and I actually think it'll be something I will wear a ton, and I think it'll be a really unique piece that will look really cool with jeans and teaching. And it's so it's like sunshine, that color. It is sunshine. And so I'm imagining knitting that through the summer, just like holding sunshine in my lap and knitting, and it's going to be glorious. So I have to knit the Lenox pullover in this color, and so I am much delayed in starting because of this very specific vision, but it'll be everything. It'll be so good. I wanted it in a pastel color so you could see the texture. I feel like things like cables and texture show up more on lighter colors, and I wanted it neon though, because it's like sometimes, like, can you imagine just a big boxy neon sweater? Like, it's just gonna be in a way like a neutral, like it's gonna be so good. So I'm dreaming of that. I cannot wait to cast on, and there's a Slack group where all the testers can show their progress and discuss things, and I'm envious of everybody who has casted on at this point. So I'm dreaming about that regularly. I got a notification today that it shipped the yarn, so okay. Also this week, Laura from Penrose Knits posted 2 pictures onto her grid on Instagram that are like sneak peeks. One is a call that's open now. I don't know how editing my podcast will go and when this will go up, but if it goes up in time, there's a call for the petite souffle. So that is the child-sized version of the souffle. And I would love nothing more for Matilda to have a matching pink come on with me. Like, I would love that so much. And so I showed Matilda my sweater, and I asked her if she wanted a matching one with me, like a pink one. And she said no. She said no. And I said, well, do you want one? And she's like, oh yeah, I want one. I want a purple sparkle one. So she wants this and purple sparkle. And so this does exist. There is DK sparkle purple yarn out there, so I can make it happen for her. But I just, in my mind, thought how cool would it be if we matched. But so my dream knitting is me and Matilda matching. Matilda's dream knitting would be a purple sparkle version of this for herself. Laura also posted a summer souffle. So imagine this, less ease, like more slimmer to your body. I mean, you don't have to do that way, I'm sure, but like, picture this is what I'm taking you on. In like cotton or some, even if it's a cotton blend, like some sort of like summer fiber short sleeve. I love it. Yeah, her grid is dream knitting. Like, go to Laura's grid, like all the sweaters she's designing, dream knitting, dream knitting. next segment is the Professor's Pearls Pearls, and this segment is a segment devoted to connecting my practice of being a professor to knitting. And of course there's so many overlaps and things with like teaching and learning, and I don't know, just it's really fun to think about. And I will share this more in the personal section, but I was at an academic conference this past week, and so like my research side is going to be kind of shining right now. That's what I'm trying to say here. So recently I was watching the Caddy Jacks podcast, and they participate in the Knit Collage Makealong, and I know that that's kind of kicking off now, and you see a lot of it on social media and on Instagram, and I am not participating in it, but it does look really fun. And on the Caddy Jacks podcast, they were talking about play and like how participating in the Knit Collage Makealong is like playing with yarn. And in 2018, I published a chapter about playing with integers and integer play. So one of my areas of research, like one of my trajectories, is on children's cognition around negative numbers. So the ways that they invent thinking about negative numbers prior to being told like how to think. And so I write about their strategies and the ways they think. And basically I had used some research on play to kind of analyze some data I had on children's thinking about integers. I can tell I'm really kind of nestling in here on math talk. I'll try and keep it not so math and get to the knitting here soon. But one of the kind of like theoretical results that came out that the paper's not like a scientific like, you know, empirical study, but it's a very theoretical piece. And one of the things I did in that chapter is I talk about the difference between integer play and playing with integers. And so integer play would be like if which I have, like created a game with negative numbers. So cards that have negative numbers on them and positive numbers on them, and I give it to a child and we play this game. And that would be integer play. It's a game that we're playing that involves negative integers in it. So that's when I'm playing integer play. Like anybody that's parented or taught knows that children play is something different than that. Like you can play a game, but it's not play. Like, and actually there's like, if you're interested, there's like pieces that have like constructs of like what like play can be. Like play is a free thing that doesn't, there are rules, you know, self-drafted by the child, but you know, there's all kinds of things like a framework that exists for play. So I use that framework to look through some data, and then I describe what playing with integers might look like. For instance, one of my favorite things that happened once with a small group is there was three children, and they drew cards, and one got -3, one got -5, and one got -8. And I was like, well, who should go first? And they were like, well, whoever has the larger number should go first. And so one of the children says, well, I should go first. I got -3, and -3 is closer to 1, so I should go first. And then the other child says, well, I got -8, and -8 is more negative than all of your negatives, and so I should go first. And the thing of it is they were both right. One was using like order-based reasoning, and one was using magnitude-based reasoning. And they were both right, just in different ways. But that thing that they did, that was playful, that was playing with integers. They invented this idea that the person with the largest card should go first, and they were like playing this intellectual play with the numbers. Okay, I am really nerding out the math, so I'm gonna halt that. Boop. But this idea that integer play, so just playing a game and playing with integers, like I can play with negative numbers, like this is in knitting. Hear me out. There can be knitting play, and there can be playing with knitting, and these are different things. Beautiful. And it's really cool that knitting is playful. So knitting play. I would love to hear what you think, like when I share this idea, like what other ideas of knitting play you can think of. But like knitting play would be like all these make-alongs we have, like we do it just for fun. It's sort of like a game. It's like, well, we do it for community, like you get around to play a game, like you do it for the community. You gather around to play Monopoly together, and much in the same way we gather around to participate in a make-along together. Whether it's the Scrappy Sweater make-along or the Books and Beanies make-along, like whatever, like we're coming together to be together to play this game where we try to make something together. And then sometimes there's prizes, like you know, if you use this hashtag, and like this all feels like a game, like a wonderful fun community game, but it's all very like game driven. And there's all kinds of things like this that we can think of, but that's different than playing with knitting. And on the Caddy Jacks podcast, they were talking about how knit collage is an opportunity to be playful with your knitting and play with your knitting. And I'm looking down at my rad vent now and just thinking about the sea glass, and I just feel like there's so many things that are like playful in knitting, like, you know, like this idea like knitting a scrappy sweater and combining your scraps, like you're playing with color, you're playing with how you want to do it. Even like the souffle, like in testing it and seeing all the different ways that people did it, like that was playful, the ways that people like were playing with color and styling and taking the pictures. And yeah, so knitting play, like ways that we like engage in these games as a community together and playing with knitting. And so what does distinguishing this give us? I don't know, just a chat, I guess, something to talk about. But I just would love to hear like the ways that you play with your knitting. For me right now, the thing that's coming to mind is twofold, which is the scrappy, playing with my scraps to make a sweater. I'm really looking forward to continuing that after my rad vent to the sea glass. And then the second thing has been the souffle, like this idea of color and styling. I seem to care more about with the souffle than some other sweaters, and I'm just thinking maybe it's because it's just like a touch feminine with the ruffle. And so I'm thinking about like how to style it, like with the skirt or dress pants for work, and that's very playful. And I really am getting so much joy with that. I think, you know, a lot of times we associate play with children. Like there's a lot of like educational literature that says like, oh, like we need to have play more in school, like play-based learning, and this is all true and wonderful. But I think like we all need to play. Like even as adults, we need these playful things. And for me, like knitting is one of those outlets to be playful and to play, and it brings so much joy in my life. We're going to transition to the personal section. So if you're just here for the knitting, there's no more knitting. So if you liked anything today, please consider giving the video a like or a comment. And if you are here for the personal things, I'll try and not make this too rambly. I just finished reading this book called Black Cake, and I would definitely recommend reading it. I was going to compare it to Where the Crawdads Sing, but that seems unfair of a comparison, because it's a totally different book. But the reason why I felt compelled to compare it to Where the Crawdads Sing is, for me, when I read Where the Crawdads Sing, it was just this very complex book. Like it was sort of like a mystery thriller. It was a fiction. It had some science in it. So like I feel like if you don't typically read mysteries, but you like science kind of readings, you could like Where the Crawdads Sing. Or if you like mysteries and not too much romance, but there is a little bit of like a romance in there, like it just is this layered story. And that is how Black Cake was. And I'm trying not to give things away about it. Black Cake, like, was just this very layered story. There's just so much going on. And I mean, there is, you know, it's less of a love story, more about like family relationships, although I don't know, I'm just not trying to give too much away, but there's all kinds of things about it. There's kind of Caribbean American, like Caribbean American sort of family traditions in there. There's like social justice, racial discussions, there's family dynamics, there's mystery, there's a reason why it's a super popular book. I would just totally recommend it. And I just started yesterday reading The Vanishing Half, so that's sort of my book talk, book chat update. This will seem like a weird thing to update you about, but I got my Birkenstocks resold, and that has just been giving me so much joy I wanted to share. I had my Birkenstocks for at least 6 years. I wore them all over. I took students on some study abroad trips, wore them there. So lots of walking, which is why I'm sharing that. And I wore them all through my whole pregnancy. My feet had swelled up, and I remember I just wore my Birkenstocks every single day. I just wore these things and wore them out. And so I took them to a shoe store that was certified in resoling Birkenstocks, and they did a fantastic job. Now, when they resole the Birkenstocks, they might need to do a cork rebuild, and in addition to the bottom of the sole, but I had taken them in time, so it just needed to be resoled. No cork buildup was needed. So anyway, I got them back, and it feels like I got a new pair of shoes because they cleaned them up. Although it feels like I got a new pair of shoes, it's like they're also still my shoes that I broke in. And so I don't know, clearly I'm sharing it here because it's filled with joy. And what else? Since I last recorded, my family celebrates Easter, and so it was Easter. And I have a 4-year-old, and you can just imagine that's really fun. So we live in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, and we live quite a ways away from our family. So our family, my husband's family, and my family, they live in Illinois, and we are in Oregon. And so that's, I don't know, at least 2,000 miles away, a 4-hour plane ride. So we don't go home every holiday, and so this is not a holiday we went home for, but so it's just the 3 of us, and we had a really beautiful time anyway. And Good Friday, which we celebrate, Matilda was at preschool, and they had an Easter bunny visit and she just loved it, and they had an Easter egg hunt. Our community on Saturday had an Easter egg hunt that we participated in, and then the Easter bunny visited our house on Sunday, and she has desperately wanted a purple scooter for a while, and so the Easter bunny brought that, and so we just spent the entire afternoon scooting on her scooter and doing chalk, and I don't know, it was one of the most pleasant afternoons I've had in a long time, and I don't know, we just really enjoyed each other's company, and it was really fun. On Sunday, I returned from a work trip to San Diego. I went to San Diego, so on Sunday, I returned from my trip to San Diego. It was a very quick in and out trip to San Diego for me. I had a presentation to give, and but I didn't want to be away from Matilda, so it was sort of in and out, but it was a really wonderful trip because I got a lot of work done, got some writing done, did my presentation, went to several talks. It was a conference, and I learned a lot, but I also did a couple fun things. I had a really nice hotel I stayed at. It was the the Manchester Grand Hyatt. It was a beautiful hotel, and the location was really epic, and it was right along the water, and actually a marvelous view out of my window. At night I could see fireworks off the ships. Like it was really nice. And so I took some time to take a walk around outside, and I even visited a yarn store. That's the only two fun things I did, was a walk and a yarn store. Well, that's not true. I did eat some good food. I had some really great ramen that was like duck ramen. Maybe I'll put a picture here. I actually went by myself. I had this amazing, I love ramen. Actually, my husband and I, one time, we stood in line for a ramen place for 3.5 hours. We stood in line to get ramen. So anyway, we like good ramen. And I had some good food. And I learned a lot, so that's good. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the community around here, and it's been a huge light in my life, and so I'm really thankful for you. And thanks for watching. And just to kind of wrap up, because it's the teacher in me, I just want to remind that there's 3 knit-alongs going on, or will be. So right now, currently, there's the Scrappy sweater Makealong, and this coming Tuesday we've got a Zoom, so I'd love to see you there. The second one will be on May 15th. It's the Books and Berets Makealong, collaborating with We Share Needles. And then hopefully maybe for consistency, June 15th, a month later, we'll start a souffle Makealong with the hashtag more souffle please. And so I don't know, if you'd like to participate in any of those, please comment below, say hi. I'd love to hear what you're planning on making. And yeah, I think it's like, wow, I'm reflecting, like, wow, it's like 3 knit-alongs, but it's just, when something's fun and playful, like, why not? All right, well, have a great week. And I try to record every 2 weeks, but 2 weeks from now I'm kind of have something going on, which I'll mention a little bit later. So it won't, the cast on party on Instagram for the Books and Berets Makealong, it will probably happen before I have another podcast out. So so anyway, I probably will see you more likely in like 3 weeks from now. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. Bye.